All right, guys, here we are. We're going to do a behind the scenes look at how I recorded the vocals to The Longest Road featuring Lissie. We're going to do a deep dive all about the whole creative process and some of the technical parts of recording the vocals. So first, let's take a listen and just see what it sounds like.
Giddy up and go dust, all the cars turn to rust. You got no means for wanderlust. Pastel trailer parks are so bright to hide the dark. All is quiet in the yard. If you are so frequently in love, if you prefer it all to me, then my love, you go down the longest road to nowhere. You pour it apart and you're just left there.
So this is a stripped down version of The Longest Road. This is the original mix, not the deadmau5 mix. And that's what I think deadmau5 did best, is he stripped it down to its essentials. It was just vocal, synth, and he did some other stuff with adding some extra tuning and some EQ to the vocals. But the whole song really is all about this core of the vocal that we did. And Lissie and I, we did it in this tiny bedroom studio in Silver Lake here in Los Angeles. I think I flipped a mattress up, used a $200 Studio Project C1 mic, and simply recorded stream of consciousness. We used this process where I would loop 3 or 4 versions of the instrumental track that I had originally given to Lissie. We'd loop that, I'd leave the room, make coffee, and just let Lissie do stream of consciousness, sing whatever came to mind, different metaphors, and we hacked everything up, chopped it into pieces, rearranged, shuffled the lyrics, and a lot of it was done written down as well, but we kind of used the DAW as a scratch pad for vocals. So it took us a little while to find that concept. We explored the visual metaphor of the desert. It's all about Joshua Tree and that 62 freeway that goes out there. So I love going out to Joshua Tree. And we loved that visual metaphor of that desolation of the desert. So it was really comparing a relationship to the starkness of the desert. So let's take a look at the session here. I'm going to show you all the different layers that I did, different whisper takes, and we'll even look at some of the flaws. So this is an early song for me. I was kind of new to doing vocals, so there's definitely mistakes in here, and we're going to show them all. And I think it adds a little bit of charm. A lot of times I'd record the vocal a little too hot. There's pops, there's clicks, there's probably a better use of the pot. I probably could have used the pop filter better. So there's a lot of p on there, little plosives. But let's start soloing the vocal and just check out a few bits here.
Pastel trailer parks are so bright to hide the dark.
Those are the verse vocals.
And if you are so frequently in love,
Those are the 2 lead layers, hard panned.
if you prefer it all to me, then my love.
After we got those core lead vocal parts down, I usually do some doubles, I do harmonies, and then I do whisper takes. And all these things do is really just sort of fill out the sound. I even use my own vocals. I'm singing backgrounds, which I'm not going to solo on here. So I'll even sing my own backgrounds, and that fills out the different registers, the male vocal register, the female upper register. Depends who's singing. So with this, we can solo these one by one. Let's hear.
If you are so frequently in love,
Those are the harmonies.
if you are so frequently in love,
And let's hear it with some of my vocals underneath.
you go down the longest road to nowhere. You pour it apart and you're just left there.
So, not amazing male background vocals, but they fill it out. Those are pretty hard tuned, so I'll hard tune the background vocals a little more. They just usually need a little more of that, and you can get away with a little more tuning on there. So lots of little imperfections, like I mentioned, not to highlight the flaws, but there are always these little pops and clicks, and that can take up room in your mix. So if I were to do this again, I would go in, chop everything at the 0 threshold where the waveform restarts, and just do some nice fades on there. I'm doing everything in Ableton these days, so Ableton's really good with their auto fades, and it's less management of crossfades that Pro Tools had. So one reason I switched over to Ableton was just better MIDI, and I still will track vocals sometimes in Pro Tools, but doing almost everything in Ableton. So I used to do Pro Tools for pretty much every song. Okay, so looking at the session here.
You go down the longest road to nowhere.
I want to play you some of the whisper takes. And these are really fun. I use them in the verses. A lot of times I use them in the chorus to beef everything up and really hard pan these sounds, band pass them, really cut the lows out and then maybe boost the highs. So let's solo one of these whisper tracks. And deadmau5 did a really cool thing. On his mix, he really pushed the presence on this and did like a high shelf EQ. So let's just hear what that sounds like.
Pastel trailer parks are so bright they in the dark, all is quiet in the yard.
So that was a really cool detail in his mix. And I think if I mix this again, I would push that little high end a little more. And especially that's a more modern sound, a little brighter, a little more high end, but I love that. So let's hear what that sounds like, layered with the other verse parts.
Pastel trailer parks are so bright they in the dark, all is quiet in the yard. Pastel trailer parks are so bright they in the dark, all is quiet in the yard.
So it's weird on its own, just the whisper solo seems a little silly, but it adds a lot later on. So I'll call it, when I ask vocalists to record these, I'll say, give me a take with your lowest version with pitch. And then after that, some people call that the whisper take, but the true whisper take has no pitch. It's just pillow talk. It's just that whisper. So I love doing all these different layers. And what I'll do is solo them all, see what's contributing, and if it's really not adding anything to the mix, I'll delete it because it's just taking up room. And speaking of room, there's all these things that I did because I was such a newbie to vocals that maybe I wouldn't do in the future, but they added some charm to it that was kind of fun. So as I mentioned earlier, I recorded things in a little too hot. I was using an Avalon 737 and tracking vocalists. Like Lissie gets very loud. She'll go very soft, very loud, very dynamic singer. So you have to be careful tracking in. You always want to give yourself some room. But I'm going to show you, there's a line in here I totally forgot, and I never really noticed this until I pulled the session up.
Brush my hair now, calm me down now, see my mighty crown.
It might have been an alternate chorus, I'm not sure, but that is playing in the background. Typically you want everything working in concert with each other, so it sounds like a cohesive group and it's very clear what the vocalist is saying. With this, it's tricky. It adds a little bit of a blur to it.
If you are so frequently in love, down, down, if you prefer it all to me, then my love, you go down the longest road to know.
So it's a cool effect, but a lot of times people will miss it in there. So it gets a little buried in that acapella, but I do love that vocal. And one thing I definitely want to mention is when you're pulling up a session like this is 10 plus years old. There's such old versions of plugins. There's like Ozone 3 was on the master. A lot of things won't open properly. So it's really, really important. Bounce everything down to audio. Autotune, it's always different versions of Autotune. And that gets screwed up with the mixes with the archives. So I do like that with Ableton. It archives things a lot better. Things recall much easier. But I mean, you'll need to have those old versions installed. So now Autotune is completely. It's probably like 3 or 4 versions, even past 8. So I had put 8 on here. Originally, it was some much earlier version of Autotune. So let's listen again to this whole.
If you are so frequently in love, down, down, see if you prefer it all to me, then my love, you go down the longest road to nowhere.
So that's one element I really like is that some of the vocals elements are fighting a little bit. They're pushing and pulling. There's this tension in there. There's this sawdust to Lissie's voice that I love. So you get this really interesting interaction of the vocals, these imperfections. They kind of layer and create this patina to the sound. So I love that. I do vocals a little more cleanly now. I get help from engineers who are better at this stuff, but I still love recording vocals myself. When Lissie and I did the track, she was literally standing over my shoulder, and I'd leave the room for those initial sessions, and then when we were tracking more layers, she would sing behind me on the mic. There's no vocal booth. There's no detachment. You're in the room making that connection. And I've even seen some engineers and producers, they'll put a rear view mirror on so they can see the vocalist while looking at the screen. So that's a cool little technique. Like you can have a car rear view mirror and be able to maintain that eye contact. I'm a little shy about it. I don't like to make direct eye contact with the vocalist while they're singing. I want them to be in their world and be zoned out and be in their creative process. So that's a deep look at The Longest Road, recording the vocals, the creative process behind the song, specifically with the lyrics. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and check out more of my videos. Thanks for watching.